Yes, you beautiful bunch. It's Holly. I hope you're all well and I hope you had an amazing Christmas. But while the gifts have all been given, I think we can all agree that the gift of a few new players in the January transfer window would be a very welcome one. So the January transfer window is open from Wednesday, the 1st of January, as always, but it actually runs until deadline day on Monday, the 3rd of February at 11 p.m. So we've got a little bit more time to do our business than we usually would. So in preparation for what we hope may well be a positive January transfer window, I've asked you for your West Ham January wish list. So the positions that you think we need to focus on most to turn our season around and reinvigorate things a bit. And I asked for what order you think we need to prioritise different positions. So before we get started, please give this video a thumbs up to support the channel and let's get going. Yes, West Ham Network. So it's time to make our January wish list, and we're going to be running through some of your comments from X. But as always, I want to know your thoughts. So drop us a comment down below of what you think we should be prioritizing this January transfer window. So a common theme that we had in what everybody was saying was that we need a new spine with a centre back, a centre mid, and a striker being very, very commonly mentioned. As you can see here, West Ham United Scout, lots and lots of people were saying the exact same thing. We need a goal scoring striker, we need a centre mid that likes to run, and we need a new centre back. Few mentions of Kudus being sold, and we're going to run a little bit more into who we could get rid of and what that would mean shortly. But we had a few calls for a new manager this transfer window, as you can imagine. But as you can see from these comments, some people are keen for us to sign a new keeper, given the current situation with dropping Areola and playing an ageing Fabianski. Doesn't feel like a long-term solution, the way that we're currently approaching the goalkeeper situation. And Dad's Our Job podcast came up with a solution to the goalkeeper situation, which would also bring commercial value to the club, suggesting Japan's #1 goalkeeper, and obviously that would bring new people watching West Ham. So from the comments, as you can see here as well, something that really stood out was that we're not wanting one or two signings. We as fans are hoping to have a massive transfer window, which is going to be a pretty big ask this time of year, but it's to replace some who are underperforming, some who are getting older, and others that lack the pace to play exciting football. Now, for us to bring players in, we need to be able to sell players in order to buy more and to stay on the right side of financial fair play, which is obviously very important. After we made a lot of investments in summer, whether they have or haven't been effective, financial fair play don't care about that. So it looks as though we're going to be having to make some funds from somewhere. So I'd also like you to let us know in the comment section which players you'd be willing to sell to free up some money and why you would choose them at this moment in time. We've got some players that are worth more money, holding more value, but could be decent players in terms of either playing them or a bit of squad rotation or just squad depth. Or we've got players that we're not using, but obviously it's not going to free up much money. So if we're wanting to invest heavily in January, we're going to have to make some horrible decisions in terms of who we're getting rid of. So let me know your thoughts in that comment section. But taking a look back at last January, we had a lot more outgoings than incoming players. And basically, it didn't do us a huge amount of good. We'll start by talking through our outgoings last January. So we sold Fornals for €8 million to La Liga's Real Betis. We loaned Benny to Lyon for €6 million. And for anyone that doesn't remember, Fornals and Benny, this was right at the end of the transfer window. And we thought, surely we're bringing someone else in if we're happy to just get rid of both of these players that are literally our squad depth at this moment in time. But we didn't bring anyone else in and it felt like a brave move. And Ben Rama was then sold to them in the summer for €14.4 million. Conor Coventry went to League One's Charlton for €1.16 million. And Thilo Kehrer went to Monaco on loan for €500,000, who then went on to buy him for €11 million. And of those players, Kehrer, Benny and Fornals, they weren't first choice, but they were decent squad players and we got rid of them. Coventry was a player who didn't seem to have much of a future at the club, so understandably he went on to go and get game time elsewhere. And then we only had one player come in last January, and it was a player that at the time I actually had very, very high hopes for, and that was Calvin Phillips on a loan deal for €7 million, because at the time he'd fallen out of favour with City, but my hope was that with Pep's squad rotation that we know can can damage some players' career because they can be talented but just not be picked to play and not get game time, which is obviously then very difficult to stay on top of your game. I was hoping that Phillips just hadn't been given the time and that there would still be a talented player there who we could work with and we could benefit from having on our team. Obviously, that didn't happen because he then went on to have a shock of a debut and second game and just struggled with every opportunity until we let him go. But that was the only piece of incoming business. So all in all, last January's transfer window was uninspiring. We essentially weakened our squad by getting rid of fringe players who weren't going to do much for us. And we brought in one player on loan who we got rid of very quickly. But now we find ourselves in a position where we really need to strengthen our squad. And given the way that we're playing and the struggles that we're having as a side, it feels like we need to invest heavily in January, which is not the best time to invest. There's not as many players available. Things are a little bit trickier because it's not one or two areas that we could do with a bit more squad depth. But we're basically looking at positions, bringing in players that are actually going to change the way in which we're playing. So we're looking at like starting 11 kind of players in some positions. So it's going to be an interesting one to see what can be done in January, because it's quite rare that you see a side manage to really strengthen in January significantly. Maybe bring in the odd player. We've had it with Bowen, Souček, Lingard. We have been able to bring in players that have made a difference. But it does mean some good old scouting. And in January, we know this is no easy feat. No team is going to be letting effective players go, and anyone that's moving around in January is likely to be struggling at whatever team they're currently signed for. So it's more of a situation where we're trying to find that untapped talent where they would work for us, but they might be struggling elsewhere. Or you pick up players from bigger sides that aren't getting the game time, for example, like we did with Lingard, which can work in your favour, like we tried to do with Calvin Phillips. So there are risks associated with it because obviously there's usually a reason why a player isn't getting played, but sometimes they're just at the wrong club and you can bring the best out of them. So while there's often a lot of pessimism around the January transfer windows, it's not always been disappointing. Like I said, Bowen, Souček, Lingard, these are all players who came to us in January transfer windows and they have been effective. They did make a difference. It's all about finding the right ones out there, which goes without saying. It's the same every transfer window. But I'm sure we're going to be starting to work. And here's hoping that whatever business we do, January is part of a longer term strategy that also benefits us in the summer. What I'm really hoping has been worked on behind the scenes is that we're not looking at things one window at a time, but instead we've almost been planning ahead of this January transfer window, aware of which players are aging, aware of where we might want to strengthen, and then looking at that and budget wise what we can then do for the summer. That's my hope anyway. But if you're asking me what I think we need to prioritise, my January transfer wish list, for me, I think striker has got to be the first priority because we've currently got Fulkrug, who has not proven himself and doesn't have youth on his side, alongside Danny Ings or Bowen. If we move him up top, I don't think that should be a long-term situation. So striker has got to be first. We've said it many years. Now we haven't got Antonio obviously playing for us. It adds a lot more urgency to this because Antonio has always done a solid job for us. He's always come in and done what's been needed. But when you find yourself with Fulkrug and Ings, it feels like a lot more urgent than it ever has. Then the second priority in my eyes is centre-back. Kilman's doing a decent enough job at times. I hope that he can improve as well. But Mavropanos worries me a lot and Todibo hasn't been able to get going. So at least one good centre-back and ideally one that can communicate well would be a really good addition. I wouldn't even mind bringing in two centre-backs, to be completely honest, but I think we'll be spreading ourselves a bit too thin if we're trying to find funds to be able to bring in all these positions. And finally, another centre-mid. If Rodriguez leaves, for example, although we could see Lewis Orford take his place, but if we can have somebody with pace that can link up play and keep things calm in the middle of the pitch, I think that would make a huge difference to our season because I really feel like that's where things have been going wrong for us, that there's not that stability in the middle, whether it's stopping players coming through on the break or whether it's dispersing the ball how we need to out to one wing or the other, just to speed things up a little bit and to inject a little bit of pace. One of the things we've really been struggling with in that position. So I'd love to see that happen. So those are my priorities in that order: striker, centre-back, centre-mid. But drop us a comment with your priorities. And I also want to hear if there are any particular players that you have your sights set on. Let us know down in that comment section. As always, if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Get involved in the conversation to support the channel. We really appreciate each and every one of you. That's all from me for now. But have an amazing new year. And until next time, go on you Irons. Irons.